The pilot said we may not make it. 187 people were going to die. Everyone was screaming. No one knew what to do. Then a calm flight attendant walked into the cockpit, grabbed the radio, and spoke words that stopped every controller cold. Her call sign was Hawk. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a Wednesday. March 18, 2020. The clock on the galley wall read 2:34 p.m., Mountain Time, and the woman in the navy blue Delta uniform was standing in the narrow space between the food carts with her back straight and her smile perfectly in place, because that was what you did when you wore that uniform, that was what the job required. You kept the smile, you kept the voice soft, you kept your eyes warm even when a passenger in seat 12C snapped her fingers for the fourth time in 40 minutes and said, loud enough for the rows around her to hear, I don't know why these girls can never get the simplest things right, it's not like they're doing anything complicated, it's just drinks and blankets, and her colleague across the aisle nodded and said, honestly, the hardest part of their job is remembering to smile, and both of them laughed, and the woman in the navy blue uniform, her name tag read Rachel Martinez, carried a fresh blanket to seat 12C and said, here you go, ma'am, is there anything else I can get for you? In the same calm, professional voice she always used, the voice that gave nothing away, the voice that had learned long ago how to say one thing and mean something else entirely, because Rachel Martinez had spent 12 years saying things she did not fully mean, starting with, yes, sir, I understand, sir, when senior officers gave orders she disagreed with, and ending with, I'm fine, I'm doing great, I love this job, to anyone who asked about her life after the Marines. She was not fine. Not exactly. But she was not broken, either. She was something in between, a person who had survived something enormous and was still figuring out what that survival meant, still putting the pieces back together in a shape that made sense. Her body had healed. The 3 shattered vertebrae in her lower spine had been surgically repaired and reinforced, and she had spent 8 months in physical therapy learning to walk without a limp, learning to stand straight without pain, learning to carry a tray of drinks down an airplane aisle without her back screaming at her. She could do all of those things now. What she could not do was fly the aircraft she had trained 11 years to fly, the AH-1Z Viper attack helicopter, the most responsive, most aggressive, most demanding machine she had ever touched, the aircraft that had made her who she was. The vibrations of helicopter rotors were too much for her repaired spine. The physical forces involved in combat helicopter flight were beyond what her reconstructed vertebrae could safely absorb. The Marine Corps doctors had been thorough, careful, and genuinely sorry when they gave her the evaluation report, and none of that had made it hurt any less. So she had left. Not all at once, she had tried a desk job first, 9 months working for a defense contractor in Virginia, sitting in meetings about procurement timelines and budget allocations and performance metrics, wearing a blazer instead of a flight suit, drinking coffee from a paper cup instead of from a thermos strapped to the side of a cockpit. 6 months of that had nearly destroyed her. Not the boredom, exactly, she could survive boredom, she had survived boredom before, long overnight watches and slow training periods and bureaucratic delays that stretched across weeks. It was the absence of the sky. It was not being in the air. It was the knowledge that somewhere above the clouds, at 35,000 feet, there were aircraft moving through the blue space above the earth, and she was not in any of them. That absence had felt physical, like a hunger she could not satisfy, like an ache in a part of herself that had no name. She had become a flight attendant because it was the closest thing available. Not to what she used to do, she understood, clearly and without self-deception, that serving beverages was not the same as flying combat missions in hostile airspace, that the Delta uniform was not the Marine Corps uniform, that a Boeing 757 was not an AH-1Z Viper. But it was in the air. It was around aircraft. It was the smell of jet fuel and the sound of engines spooling up and the particular quality of light at altitude, the way the sun looked when you were above the cloud layer and the world below had gone white and soft and far away. It was enough. Most days, it was enough. Today, In the galley of Flight 2847 with the businesswoman in 12C still talking about how easy this job was, Rachel was stacking cups and listening to a pilot who was deadheading back to Seattle in seat 3A tell the woman beside him, in a voice that was not quite quiet enough, that, the cabin crew genuinely cannot grasp what we deal with up front, it's a completely different level of pressure. They just push the cart and let the autopilot do the work, and Rachel was almost smiling, a real smile this time, private and a little sad, because she knew things about cockpit pressure that this man had probably never imagined. She heard the sound through the cockpit door at 2:34 p.m. Not words at first, just a sharp intake of breath, a scrape of something against metal, a sound that was wrong in the particular way that wrong sounds announce themselves to people who have been trained to notice wrongness. Rachel put down the cup she was holding and moved toward the front of the aircraft. The cockpit door was a few feet from the galley. She was standing outside it when she heard First Officer Emily Grant's voice, high and cracking, "Captain. Captain Morrison, can you hear me? Captain." And then, quieter, almost to herself, almost a whisper, "Oh God. Oh no. Oh no." Rachel knocked twice on the cockpit door, the standard signal, and pushed it open. What she saw took her about 2 seconds to fully assess, because she had been trained to assess situations quickly and completely, and her brain had not forgotten that training even after 6 years away from combat operations. Captain James Morrison, 53 years old, 19,000 flight hours, 22 years with Delta, was slumped against the left side of his seat with his eyes half open and his face the color of old ash. His left hand had fallen into his lap. His mouth was slightly open. He was breathing, but shallowly, and the breathing had a sound to it that Rachel recognized, that particular labored quality that meant a body working very hard to do something it was struggling to keep doing. First Officer Emily Grant, 26 years old, 947 total flight hours, 947, written in the logbook she kept on her bedroom desk, 9 months out of her initial training program, was in the right seat with both hands on the controls and tears streaming down her face and the radio handset halfway to her mouth and a look in her eyes that Rachel had seen before, in other emergencies, on other people, the look of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their training and found nothing on the other side of it. He grabbed his chest and then I tried to wake him up and he didn't. Emily's voice was coming too fast, the words bunching up against each other. The hydraulic system light just came on, System A is showing red and System B is starting to degrade and I don't know why and I was going to call you but I didn't know what to call for and I can't, I don't know if we may not make it, I don't, she stopped herself. She was hyperventilating slightly. We may not make it, she said again, and this time it was quieter, and it was the most frightened Rachel had ever seen another human being in a situation where they still had a choice about what happened next. Rachel stepped fully into the cockpit and pulled the door shut behind her. She was calm. Not because she was not feeling anything, she was feeling quite a lot, the sharp clarity of adrenaline, the particular focus that came with real danger, something she had not felt in 6 years and had not fully realized she missed, but because she had learned, in 12 years of military aviation and hundreds of hours of combat flying, that calm was not the absence of feeling. Calm was the choice to let the feelings exist without letting them make the decisions. First Officer Grant, she said, in the voice she had used in cockpits before, the voice that was not loud but was absolutely certain. I need you to breathe. Right now. Take one full breath in and let it out slowly. Emily stared at her. You work in the, breathe first, Rachel said. Talk after. Emily breathed. Good. Again. Emily breathed again. Okay. My name is Rachel Martinez. I am a former captain in the United States Marine Corps. I flew AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters for 12 years. I have 3,200 flight hours, 3,200 hours of actual flight time. I know what a dual hydraulic failure looks like and I know what to do about it, and I am going to help you get this aircraft on the ground safely. But I need you to trust me and I need you to do exactly what I tell you, and I need you to do it right now. Can you do that? The question was genuine, she needed the answer, needed Emily to make the choice, needed her to be a partner in this rather than an obstacle. Emily looked at her for 2 full seconds. Then she nodded. "Show me your hydraulic indicators." Emily pointed. Rachel leaned over and read the panel the way she had read instrument panels in darkness and smoke and hostile fire, quickly and completely. System A was failed. System B was degrading. She estimated 15 to 20 minutes before it reached a critical threshold, possibly less depending on how fast the failure was progressing. They had a backup system, a manual reversion circuit that would allow limited but functional flight control even with both primary hydraulic systems failed, but it had to be engaged manually, and it was the kind of system that pilots trained on in simulators but rarely engaged in actual flight because the situations that required it were uncommon and serious. "There's a hydraulic manual backup circuit in the overhead panel," Rachel said. "Circuit breaker labeled hydraulic manual backup." "Find it." Emily looked up. Her hands were still shaking, but she was looking, which was what mattered. "There," she said. "Yes." "Pull it." Emily pulled the breaker. The aircraft's handling changed immediately. Rachel felt it even without touching the controls, the subtle shift in the way the aircraft moved through the air, heavier and slower to respond, like the difference between a sports car and a truck. But it was flying. They were still flying. "Good," Rachel said. "That's the backup system. It works, but the controls will feel heavy. Like you're pushing against resistance. That's normal. That's what it's supposed to feel like. You're going to keep flying this aircraft exactly the way you've been flying it, maintain heading, maintain altitude, while I take care of the systems and the communications." "Can you maintain altitude and heading?" "Yes," Emily said. Her voice was steadier. Not steady, not yet, but steadier, which was enough. "Yes, I can fly. That's what I know how to do." "Then fly," Rachel said. "I'll handle everything else." She moved to the captain's position and checked Morrison's pulse. Weak and irregular, but present. He was alive. She unstrapped him from the captain's seat and, with Emily's help during a break in the turbulence, repositioned him into the jump seat behind the cockpit, where she strapped him securely and tilted his head back to keep his airway clear. She opened the intercom and spoke to the senior flight attendant, Patricia Chen, who had 12 years of experience and a voice that could stay calm through almost anything. "Patricia, I need you to listen carefully. Captain Morrison has had a medical event. I need you to find out if there is a physician or a nurse on this aircraft and bring them to the front immediately. I also need you to keep the passengers calm and seated. Do not make any announcements yet. I will explain everything shortly." A pause. "Rachel, are you? I'm handling it. Get me a doctor." She keyed the radio. Her voice, when she spoke on the radio frequency, was the voice she had used in combat, the voice that had directed attack missions and coordinated evacuations and talked her crew through emergency landings in darkness with tracers going past the canopy. It was a voice that left no room for doubt, not because it was loud or aggressive, but because it was so completely certain that uncertainty seemed to have no place in it. "Denver Center, this is Delta 2847, we are declaring an emergency. We have a captain incapacitated with a suspected cardiac event, and we have dual hydraulic system failure with partial manual reversion engaged. Requesting immediate vectors to nearest airport with emergency medical facilities and a runway long enough for a 757 with degraded flight controls." The controller's response came back almost immediately, professional and focused in the way that good controllers became focused when the word emergency came across their frequency. "Delta 2847, Denver Center, copy your emergency. Turn left, heading 045, descend and maintain flight level 240. Nearest suitable field is Billings Logan, 73 miles, runway 16, 8,000 feet. State souls on board and fuel state." 187 souls on board, Rachel said. Fuel state approximately 4,800 pounds. Roughly 50 minutes endurance at current burn rate. Copy, Delta 2847. You are priority handling. All traffic is clearing your path. There was a pause on the frequency. Then a different voice, older, with the measured authority of someone who had been in that control center for a long time and had learned when to ask questions that mattered. Delta 2847, this is Denver Center Supervisor. I need to confirm, who is the pilot currently controlling the aircraft? Rachel had expected this question. She had known it was coming from the moment she walked into the cockpit. She had known that when she answered it, she would be opening something that she had very carefully and deliberately closed 6 years ago, when she traded her flight suit for a cabin crew uniform and told herself that the person who used to fly attack helicopters was someone else, someone from a different chapter, someone who had done her part and now had the right to be ordinary. She had believed that. She still believed it, mostly. But 187 people were on this aircraft, and one frightened young pilot was flying it on backup hydraulics, and a man was unconscious in the jump seat, and there was no one else. Denver Center, she said, this is Rachel Martinez. I am currently a Delta flight attendant, but I am a former captain in the United States Marine Corps with 3,200 flight hours and fixed-wing emergency procedure training. I am assisting First Officer Grant with emergency operations. A silence. Complete, full, radio-wide silence. She could almost feel the ripple of it spreading through every frequency that was monitoring this channel. Then the supervisor again, and his voice was careful in a way that suggested he already suspected something. Captain Martinez, did you say your name is Rachel Martinez? Affirmative. Ma'am, can you confirm your call sign? She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She had not spoken that call sign in 6 years. Not to anyone. Not even to herself, not even in the privacy of her own thoughts, where she still sometimes dreamed of that night in Helmand Province when everything had gone sideways and she had somehow brought her crew out of it alive, her and her crew, 14 people, and 33 others they had pulled out of a compound under fire, all of them walking away from that insertion while surface-to-air missiles were still searching the sky for them. She had not thought of herself as Hawk in 6 years. She had been Rachel Martinez, Delta flight attendant, cabin crew member, the woman who brought you your Diet Coke and apologized when turbulence made the cart rattle. That was who she was now. Except right now, in this cockpit, with Emily Grant flying on backup hydraulics and Captain Morrison unconscious and 187 lives depending on someone who knew what they were doing, right now, she needed to be Hawk one more time. Call sign Hawk, she said into the radio. The frequency erupted. Not in any disorganized way, everyone was still professional, still following radio protocol, but in the way that a very controlled space can erupt when something extraordinary lands in the middle of it. Multiple voices, from multiple facilities, all of them asking variations of the same question. Did she say Hawk? Hawk from the Helmand Rescue? The Marine Corps Hawk? Is that actually? Emily Grant had turned to look at her. The aircraft drifted slightly left, and Emily caught it and corrected, her hands steadier on the yoke than they had been before, because something had changed in the cockpit in the last 2 minutes, some invisible quality of the air, some shift in the weight of the situation from impossible to very difficult but survivable, and she was starting to feel it. You're Hawk. Emily said. They teach about you at flight school. The Helmand Province Rescue. 47 Marines. 1 insertion under fire. You're, First Officer Grant, eyes on your instruments, Rachel said, without heat, without impatience. Yes, ma'am. Emily looked at her instruments. A new voice came on the frequency. Military. Sharp-edged, the way military voices got when they were in operation mode rather than conversation mode. Delta 2847, this is Colonel Thomas Stevens, Montana Air National Guard, monitoring from Malmstrom AFB. Captain Martinez, is this Hawk? Colonel Stevens, this is Hawk. I am currently occupied, sir. A pause, and then something in the colonel's voice shifted slightly, became something warmer beneath the military precision. Ma'am, I flew transport support in Afghanistan in 2017. I was on the ground at Firebase Shoreb the night you ran the Helmand extraction. You pulled 47 men out of that valley, including my younger brother, Second Lieutenant David Stevens. I have been wanting to find a way to say thank you for 3 years. Rachel said nothing. On the overhead panel, a warning light she had been tracking flickered amber, and she reached up and silenced it without taking her eyes off the primary flight display. Whatever you need to bring that aircraft down safely, Colonel Stevens said, you have it. I am scrambling 2 F-15 Eagles from the guard right now. They will be on your wing in 11 minutes. You will have escort all the way to Billings. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Captain. For everything. Emily was crying again, but differently this time, not from panic, but from something she probably could not have named if someone had asked her, that particular complex feeling of being in the presence of something that was larger than ordinary life and knowing that you were part of it. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry, I'm not, I'm flying, I'm focused, I just, don't apologize, Rachel said. You're doing everything right. How are the controls feeling? Heavy. Like pushing through water. But I have them. Good. Keep them. You're going to fly this entire approach. I'm going to manage systems and radio, and I'm going to talk you through every phase of the descent and landing, but you are going to fly it. Your hands on the yoke. Your feet on the rudder pedals. You. I've never done a manual approach with degraded flight controls outside a simulator. I know. But you've done it in the simulator, and the simulator exists because the training works. Your hands know what to do. I'm going to remind you when they forget. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. Okay. Yes. I can do this. You can, Rachel said. I know you can. I wouldn't tell you if I didn't believe it. Patricia Chen appeared at the cockpit door. She had a doctor, a retired emergency physician who had been traveling to visit his daughter and had identified himself when he heard the request over the PA. He came into the cockpit immediately, checked Morrison's vitals, and stabilized him as much as was possible in the limited space, administering aspirin from the aircraft's medical kit and monitoring his breathing. He's stable for now, the doctor said. But he needs a hospital within 30 minutes if possible. Billings in 18 minutes, Rachel told him. She had the approach plates for Billings Logan open on the captain's navigation display, had already calculated the descent profile, had already identified the backup landing configuration they would use given the hydraulic status. The F-15s arrived exactly when Colonel Stevens had said they would, 2 of them sliding into formation off the left and right wings with the smooth precision of pilots who had done this many times before, who had escorted damaged aircraft, who knew how to be a presence without being an intrusion. Delta 2847, this is Eagle Flight, the lead pilot said. We have you visual. How are you doing up there? Managing, Rachel said. Weather at Billings? Clear and calm, ma'am. Wind light and variable. Visibility unlimited. You picked a beautiful afternoon for an emergency. I try, Rachel said, and Emily, despite everything, laughed. The descent took 17 minutes. Rachel talked Emily through every foot of it, the altitude callouts, the airspeed checks, the configuration changes, the flap extensions, the gear deployment, which required extra attention on manual reversion because the hydraulic assist that made the gear extend smoothly was partially compromised, and the gear came down with a thud that made Emily flinch and Rachel say, quickly and calmly, that's normal for this configuration. You're fine, check your gear down indicators, and Emily checked them and they were green, all 3, and she said, green, all 3, in a voice that was starting to sound like a pilot's voice, confident and specific and precise. Perfect, Rachel said. Every single thing you just did was correct. Now we're going to start the approach. Billings Tower is going to clear us straight in for runway 16. The runway is 8,000 feet, more than enough. You're going to fly a normal approach, maybe a little faster than standard to give you extra control authority with the degraded hydraulics, and you're going to make one of the best landings of your career. Ready? Ready, Emily said. The approach was not perfect. Nothing about it was standard or easy or calm in any technical sense. The aircraft was heavier to control than Emily had ever experienced in actual flight, the yoke requiring constant, conscious pressure to hold position, the corrections that would normally be effortless now requiring deliberate effort and focus. A gust of wind at 400 feet pushed the nose left, and Emily corrected with more force than she needed and overcorrected, and Rachel said, "Easy, ease it back, that's it, right there, hold it," and Emily held it, the aircraft steadying and descending and the runway growing in the windscreen from a thin gray stripe to a real thing, a surface, a place to land. 200 feet, Rachel said. Airspeed good. Looking very good. Start your flare in about 5 seconds. Emily started the flare. Hold it there. Let it settle. Easy on the yoke. Easy. The main wheels touched the runway with a solid, decisive thump, not a greaser, not the kind of landing passengers applauded because they forgot they had landed, but a real landing, a purposeful landing, an aircraft committed to the ground and staying there. Emily deployed the spoilers and applied reverse thrust and the aircraft decelerated down the runway, and Rachel said, "Brake normally, we have plenty of runway," and Emily braked normally, and the aircraft rolled to a smooth stop with 3,000 feet of runway still ahead of them. For about 4 seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Emily Grant put both hands over her face and made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob and said, "Oh my God. We landed. We actually landed." "You landed," Rachel said. "I talked. You flew." Emily was shaking. "I couldn't have done that without you." "You could have," Rachel said. "It would have been harder. But you could have." She keyed the radio. "Billings Tower, Delta 2847, runway 16, we are clear of the active. Requesting emergency vehicles immediate. Delta 2847, emergency vehicles are rolling to your position. Outstanding job up there. Thank the first officer," Rachel said. She flew the approach. A pause from the tower. "Copy that. Outstanding job, Delta 2847. In the cabin, the passengers had known that something was wrong. You cannot hide two F-15 fighter jets flying off the wingtips of a commercial aircraft from 187 people sitting next to windows, and the landing had released something that had been building for the last 40 minutes, and the applause started before the aircraft had fully stopped rolling, a wave of it that Rachel could hear through the closed cockpit door. And Emily was still shaking and still half crying, and Rachel put a hand briefly on her shoulder and said, "Good work, First Officer. Seriously. Well done." Emily looked at her with an expression that Rachel could not quite read, something between gratitude and admiration and a kind of stunned recognition, as if she were meeting someone she had previously only encountered in textbooks. "They teach about you at flight school," Emily said again, quietly. "I know that sounds strange. But they literally teach what you did in Helmand Province as a case study in crew resource management and emergency decision-making. And you've been working as a flight attendant." "I've been working as a flight attendant," Rachel agreed. "It's a good job." "It's not, you could be flying a carrier. Anywhere. They'd hire you in an hour." "I know," Rachel said. "I'm thinking about it." She meant it. She had been thinking about it for the last 40 minutes more seriously than she had thought about it in 6 years. The paramedics boarded immediately when the aircraft stopped, and Captain Morrison was on a stretcher and off the aircraft in under 3 minutes. The FAA inspectors came next, and the airline's operations representatives, and the airport emergency coordinators, and the whole formal machinery of an aviation incident response deployed itself around the aircraft with practiced efficiency. Rachel answered every question she was asked, clearly and precisely, because that was what the situation required. She gave her name, her former rank, her flight hours, her training qualifications, her assessment of the hydraulic failure and the emergency procedures she had applied, her evaluation of First Officer Grant's performance, which she gave as excellent without hesitation because it had been. She did not embellish. She did not make herself larger in the telling. She described what had happened, and what she had done, and what Emily had done, and what the outcome was. When she stepped off the aircraft onto the tarmac, the two F-15 pilots were standing there. They had landed at Billings ahead of them, had requested permission to meet the aircraft, and the airport had accommodated them because airports accommodate things like this when lives have just been saved. They were in their flight gear, helmets tucked under their arms, and when Rachel came down the air stairs they both came to attention at the same moment and saluted her with the kind of precision that only comes from genuine respect, not ceremony, not performance, but the real thing. Rachel stopped. She returned the salute. The lead pilot, a major who looked to be in his early 40s, said, "Ma'am, it is an honor. I did a rotation at Quantico in 2015. You taught our squadron emergency procedures. You and your reputation are the reason half of us can handle a systems emergency without losing our heads." "The training did that," Rachel said. "I just ran the courses." "Yes, ma'am," the major said, in the tone of someone who had decided not to argue the point but had not changed his mind. The businesswoman from seat 12C came off the aircraft behind a group of other passengers, and Rachel saw her notice the salute, saw her watch the F-15 pilot step back, saw her turn and look at Rachel with an expression that had none of the earlier confidence in it, only a kind of shaken reckoning. She walked over. She had been crying, or was still crying, it was hard to tell. She stopped a few feet away from Rachel and said, I heard everything. Through the cockpit door. I heard you talking to the air traffic control. I heard them say Hawk. I heard," she stopped. Started again. "I said terrible things. About your job. About flight attendants. I didn't know, ma'am," Rachel said, not unkindly, "you don't need to apologize. You were a passenger on an airplane. You didn't know what you didn't know. But I was so dismissive. You were rude," Rachel said. "It happens. People are rude sometimes. It didn't change anything about how I did my job." The woman looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a different way of seeing things. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you here? Why a flight attendant, when you could be, why?" "Because I wanted to stay close to the sky," Rachel said. "Because the sky is where I belong. And because every job has dignity if the person doing it brings something real to it. I brought something real today. I bring something real on ordinary days, too. It just looks different." The story went everywhere within 24 hours, because stories like this one always do, because humans are drawn to the hidden warrior narrative, to the idea that extraordinary things exist inside ordinary-looking containers, to the knowledge that the person pouring your coffee might once have saved 47 lives under fire in Afghanistan. Flight attendant with secret combat pilot past helps land plane after captain has heart attack. Delta crew member revealed as legendary Marine Corps ace during Madeira emergency. Every variation of the headline. Every version of the story. Rachel declined almost all of the interview requests, and the ones she did not decline she answered the same way she had answered the FAA inspectors, clearly, precisely, without embellishment. She was not uncomfortable with the attention. She simply did not know what to do with it, because she had not done anything she considered remarkable. She had done what the situation required. She had used the skills she had. That was all. Captain James Morrison survived. He had a myocardial infarction at 35,000 feet and was in surgery within 45 minutes of the aircraft landing at Billings, and he was in a stable condition within 4 hours, and his cardiologist told him he was alive because someone on that aircraft had kept the emergency response moving in the right direction. Morrison called Rachel from the hospital. The conversation was brief, because Morrison was not a man given to lengthy speeches even under normal circumstances, and a hospital bed did not change that. "I heard what you did," he said. "I want to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Rachel said. "Get some rest. My wife wants to thank you. Tell her I'm glad it worked out." A pause. "Martinez. You should be flying. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Are you going to listen? I'm thinking about it, she said. And then, because she was also honest, yes. Probably yes. First Officer Emily Grant sent her a message that was 3 paragraphs long and slightly formal, because Emily was the kind of person who wrote formal messages when she was feeling something strongly, who reached for structure when emotion made things complicated. She wrote that she had been terrified, and that she had almost stopped being terrified at the point when Rachel spoke to her in that particular voice, that voice that knew exactly where it was going and how to get there. She wrote that she had gone back and looked up the Helmand Province case study in her training materials, the one they used in the crew resource management course, and that she had read it 3 times since the emergency, and that she could not quite reconcile the person in the case study, call sign Hawk, Marine Corps captain, the pilot who had gotten 47 people out of a valley in Afghanistan under conditions that the case study described as extreme hostile fire and complete system degradation, with the woman who had been bringing her coffee in the first-class galley that morning. She wrote, at the end, I don't know if you know this, but you changed what I think is possible. Not just in emergencies. In general. I wanted you to know that. Rachel read the message twice. Then she wrote back, you changed what I think is possible, too. You flew that approach. Not me. You. She sent it. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment and looked at the pair of Marine Corps wings she kept on the windowsill, the ones she had not moved from that spot since she left the Corps, the ones that caught the light in the late afternoon and made it bend in ways she had always found difficult to explain. She went back to work 2 weeks later. Delta had offered her a sponsored transition to the flight deck. They would cover the type rating, the line training, the whole process of moving from cabin crew to a commercial pilot seat. The CEO had called personally. Several other airlines had contacted her through her union representative. 2 regional carriers had offered direct hire positions. She had options, for the first time in 6 years, that did not feel like compromises. She was going to take one of them. She had not decided exactly which one yet, but she had decided that she was going to decide, which was its own kind of clarity after 6 years of waiting for something to become clear. But today she was back on Flight 2847, Atlanta to Seattle, and she was in the galley at the front of the aircraft stacking cups the same way she had done it 2 weeks ago, and the businesswoman from Seat 12C was in Seat 12C again. She had booked the same flight deliberately. Her travel agent had told Delta, specifically to be on the aircraft with Rachel Martinez. And when Rachel came down the aisle the woman said, Ms. Martinez, with something in her voice that was not the same as anything she had said 2 weeks ago, something careful and real and slightly ashamed in the way that genuine regret is ashamed. I feel a great deal safer knowing you're here. Thank you, ma'am, Rachel said. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, please. And Rachel, thank you. For everything. For all of it. Of course, Rachel said, and moved on down the aisle, because there was a cart to push and a snack service to prepare and 186 other passengers who might want something. Near the back of the aircraft, a small boy with his face pressed against the window, he was maybe 8 years old, sitting with his mother in the last window seat, watching the tarmac vehicles move below, turned away from the window when Rachel reached his row and looked up at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned to look through people. Are you the pilot lady? He asked. The one on the news? His mother started to apologize, but Rachel shook her head and crouched down to the boy's level, which brought her face level with his. I'm a flight attendant, she said. I used to be a pilot. Both? He said. You're both. I've been both at different times, Rachel said. Right now I'm a flight attendant. But yes. Both. He thought about this for a moment with the seriousness that children bring to important information. My teacher said you saved people, he said. She said you were brave. There were a lot of people who were brave that day, Rachel said. The pilot who flew the plane, she was brave. The doctors who helped the sick captain, they were brave. The people on the plane who stayed calm, they were brave too. But you were the most brave, the boy insisted, with the inflexibility of children on matters they have decided. Rachel considered arguing this point and decided against it. She reached into the pocket of her uniform jacket and found what she knew was there, the small silver pin she had carried for 6 years and never quite been able to leave behind, the Marine Corps aviator wings they had given her at her retirement ceremony, the ones that belonged to whoever she had been before she became a flight attendant. She pressed them gently into the boy's hand. He opened his fingers and looked at them, and his eyes went wide with the kind of wonder that is completely unperformed, completely real. "Keep those," she said. "And remember, brave is not one thing. It's not one kind of person or one kind of job. It's what you decide to do when the moment comes. That's all it ever is." Patricia Chen found Rachel in the galley 20 minutes after the landing, after the paramedics and the FAA inspectors and the airline officials had done their work and the aircraft had become quiet in the way that aircraft became quiet after extraordinary things had happened inside them, a quality of stillness that was different from ordinary quiet, heavier with what it contained. Patricia had been Rachel's senior on this route for 3 years. They had worked together through delays and sick passengers and once a very difficult situation involving a man who had too much to drink in Dallas and decided that the beverage cart was an appropriate place to make a political speech, which Rachel had handled with a gentleness that Patricia had always admired without fully understanding. Patricia was 61 years old and had been a flight attendant for 34 years and had seen most of what an airplane could show you, but she had not seen this. She stood in the galley doorway and looked at Rachel, who was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed and her eyes on the middle distance, and said, "You should have told me." Rachel looked at her. "Told you what?" "Any of it." "All of it." "That you were a Marine. That you could fly." "That you were," Patricia stopped. Started again. "I worked beside you for 3 years. You helped me when my mother was sick. You covered my shifts when I needed time. You remembered my daughter's birthday every year. I thought I knew you." "You do know me," Rachel said. "Everything you just said, that's me." "That's all true. But there's so much more." "There's always more to people," Rachel said. "That's true of everyone. You have things I don't know about you. Things that don't fit in a job description." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay? Honestly?" And Rachel thought about the question, really thought about it, rather than giving the automatic answer, and said, "I think I'm better than okay. I think today was the first day in 6 years that I felt completely like myself." Which is a strange thing to say about a hydraulic emergency, but there it is. Patricia nodded slowly. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" And Rachel said, "I'm going to finish this beverage service. And then I'm going to go home and make some phone calls. And then I'm going to fly again, properly, the way I'm supposed to." Patricia nodded again, and this time there was something in it that looked like relief. The boy closed his hand around the wings. "I'll remember," he said. "I promise." Rachel stood up and pushed her cart to the next row, and behind her the boy held the wings up in the light from the window and turned them so the light caught the metal, and his mother looked at them and then looked at Rachel's back as she moved away down the aisle, and did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Outside the windows, the aircraft was climbing through a thin layer of cloud, and then it was above the cloud, and the sky was the particular deep blue it became at altitude when the atmosphere thinned and the light came from a direction that had no equivalent at ground level. Rachel reached the galley and began setting up the beverage service, opening the cooler and counting the cups the way she had done it 1,000 times before, and she was thinking about the flight deck, about the conversation she was going to have with Delta's chief pilot next week, about the type rating course, about the first time she would sit in a commercial cockpit with controls under her hands and a runway ahead of her and a sky above her that belonged to her again. She was a flight attendant. She was also Hawk. She was also whoever she was going to become next. All of it was true. All of it was hers. And the sky outside the window was exactly the same sky it had always been, enormous and patient and absolutely indifferent to the categories people put themselves in, waiting for anyone brave enough to enter it.